Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. And giving you a flavor of that Dies Irae old world spice. Dies Irae, this is a funerary chant. I'm playing it at the beginning of every Rules for Retrogrades for the foreseeable future because it's what we love. This is retrograde. We are romantics here on Rules for Retrogrades. We are erstwhile, backward looking, past loving, Western civilization forming, culture building Roman Catholics here on Rules for Retrogrades and in the one holy, true Catholic Apostolic Church. The four marks of the church mean that we really live in the past, present, and future combined. This is what Dickens says the spirit of Christmas is. I'm not sure how good a Christian Charles Dickens was, but he gets this. Ebenezer Scrooge, by the time he becomes a good man at the end of A Christmas Carol, he gets this. To be a good man means to be a good Christian, which means you emulate Christ's timelessness. It means you live in Christmas past, redeemed man, time past, Christmas present, Christmas future, redeemed man, time, present, and future. And thank you for joining today. I haven't done a liturgy show in a long time, but it's worth doing today because what I'm seeing online is strange, a strange phenomenon of young folks for the first time ever attacking tradition. I mean, I'm not being melodramatic, literally attacking tradition. And parish orphans and retrogrades, you know, the church is tradition. It doesn't mean things can and do never change. Oh, they do. But it's natural to hold on to the past, even in the cultural political sense, to stand athwart history and yell halt. Like William F. Buckley said, as Catholics, we do that 1,000 times more, 10,000 times more than our inclination as political or cultural conservatives to yell halt. And nowhere more so than in the realm of doctrine, of course. That's protected by the Holy Spirit, which means it's out of our hands. The second most that we want to stand athwart history and yell halt is in an area that can change and has changed. And since doctrine is it's ultra vires, it's overseen by the Holy Spirit, it does not depend on the agency or the action of Christians. This second domain, second most important domain for saying, let's not have Jacobin change, is in our holy liturgy. And of course, we are living in the wake of the shadow of the new modernist monument built in 1969, the Novus Ordo Missae, atheist maker, Novus Ordo Missae. Now, note my categories. I have a very, very definite, conspicuous position on the liturgy. It can change. It is not irreformable doctrine. It is a discipline that can change. It should rarely or never. And what happened in 1969 was allowable. The movement from the TLM Mass to the Novus Ordo Missae is allowable. It doesn't disrupt or destroy the four marks of the Roman Catholic Church that we had innovators who, for either sport, blood sport or sport, or for even more darkling motives than that, did change it. It doesn't disprove the faith, that's all I'm saying, the way it would if some high-ranking, magisterium official or a pope taught ex cathedra that there are 4 persons in the Trinity. That would just explode everything. That hasn't happened. So that makes me conspicuous, because you will get fellow trads. I'm a kind of a trad that will talk about the Novus Ordo Missae, the catastrophe, liturgically speaking, from 1969, given to us by a man named Bunini. You guys know the story well. A very suspicious man who wanted change, who wanted to Protestantize the faith. You do it through lex orandi, lex credendi. He did it, and it didn't destroy things. It just destroyed things. No, all caps. It did not formally destroy the church. It just destroyed most people's faiths, including yours truly. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in the wake of this thing, which was really published. Think of it as 1970, one of the last days in the year in 1969. People didn't go to their first Novus Ordo, people who were alive at the time, until 1970, until New Year's, most people. So think of this as 1970. I wasn't born for over a decade. I was born in the 80s. And the changes from Vatican II were sweeping through the church. Now, I'll talk about things that are central to this and related to this as we go. But first, I want to give you a smattering of what I mean of the new, I guess they're Zoomers, maybe they're Generation Alpha, who have turned against the tradition wave among young people that's really been strong over the last better part of a decade, over the last 6-7 years. I mean, TNT, me and Taylor Marshall on his channel were one of the, bright, clear voices bringing young people to the TLM. And I mean, I still get emails every week. I would say every day, but I'm very careful what I say here. Almost every day, but every week saying I go to the TLM because of you and Taylor Marshall over there, because of you and Taylor Marshall. And maybe because all we did was we say we go and it's cool. And I didn't realize how serious all this stuff was, how real all this stuff was, how sublime the Eucharist was, until I went there. I thought it was a joke when I was raised at the Novus Ordo. That's what I said. And that made a bunch of people go, because Taylor Marshall's channel was popping. And now there seems to be a slightly younger half a generation, or maybe a quarter generation younger, 5 to 10 years, that are rebelling stupidly against that. And I'm going to play for you some young guy. I have no clue who this goofball is. Just saying, spitting, flexing falsity up and down this video. All he says that's true, as far as I can remember off the top, is that the constitutions of Vatican II don't contain any error. Okay, well, that's true. There's no error in the strict theological sense in the Vatican II documents. But everything else he says pertains to liturgy, and everything else that he says about liturgy is a bad mischaracterization of the liturgy. And you guys know, after Traditionalist Custodes came out, I said, this is horrible, this is awful. Francis has been an awful, horrible pontiff. So of course he's going to do an awful, horrible thing to stymie, to halt, to reverse the TLM enthusiasm that's been in the church for 5 to 10 years, because that's what a horrible pontiff would do. He did it, but I said, now he does have the right to do it. He has the right in this prudential sense to do wrong. I know you guys have heard Lincoln, you don't have the right to do wrong. Yeah, but with prudential things, if it's a capacity that belongs to an office, you kind of do. And Francis did that. And I debated Tim Flanders of 1 Peter 5. And people were, again, folks were barking. They don't want any nuance at all. I don't want to sound like another certain goofball online by talking about nuance, but there has to be some buts in our approach to things, whether we're talking about liturgy or theology or philosophy or political philosophy or whatever, political theology, aesthetics, poetics. We have to have some room for saying, well, who's the best quarterback? Well, it's Tom Brady. Oh, okay, so he's the best quarterback scrambler? No. He's got the best overall numbers, best win share, But no, he's like the worst runner ever to play quarterback. And that's a position that's very weak at quarterback. So I'm saying, but that's not the kind of but that we've associated with those called but philosophers on this channel. That's not saying yes and no at the same time, which we associate with Francis and his deceitful lieutenants. That's not overly complex. That's not making a simple thing stupidly labyrinthine. No, so we need a but or two in a paragraph of text, in an approach to most topics. We need a but or two. No Shlomo, right? We need one or two. And here's my but. My but or two is Francis can do what he did. He's awful. He's awful for a dozen or more doctrinal reasons that are actually a bigger deal textually. Maybe not as big a deal in the life of the lived Catholic, because, forcing us, basically trying to do away with Benedict XVI's reaffirmation of the old Mass, that affects people week in, week out, if their bishop chose to do what Francis enabled them to do, which is essentially abort the TLM. So people feel that every week, but for people like me that are men of text, I'm not going back to being an agnostic-styled atheist, which is what the Novus Ordo made me growing up in the church in the 80s and 90s at Catholic schools with my women teachers and all the James Martin type men who ran lots of my schools, like all boys Dallas Jesuit. Now, I'm not going back to that. Then I didn't know, the faith is real. I saw all these women that said cringe things. I went to this cringe liturgy, the Novus Ordo, with all this stuff happening, clown masses happening. And it made me into an agnostic atheist by the time I was confirmed in 8th grade, well before, actually. That's something Michael Knowles says. I was an atheist by the time I was confirmed. I was an atheist by 4th or 5th grade, if I'm telling the truth. I'm a pretty intelligent guy. I note patterns well. The adults that go to this thing, they don't have any big kids. I knew about that whole thing. Culturally, the baby boomers, they all had 12 brothers and sisters. None of my friends had 12 brothers and sisters. None of them had 6. I had 2. My friends all had 1 or 2. After 4th grade, when I got the sex talk, well, isn't that a rule? You pretty much have to have big families, or 9 times out of 10. A small family means you're contracepting. So you see, the adults that attend this Novus Ordo don't take it seriously. You see the adults around. They're not fasting on Fridays. They're not abstaining from meat. If you catch them, you're having a meat sandwich or whatever. Mr. Carruthers, what, isn't this Friday? Aren't you Catholic? Oh, yeah, well, I already ordered it. Jesus wouldn't want me to waste. Yeah, he would. Yes, he would. That's not a waste. You see, that behavior is correlative with this Novus Ordo attitude, the Novus Ordo Seclorum attitude, and you just don't believe by the time you get confirmed. And none of my friends did either. And none of my friends' friends did either. And most of them didn't come back to the faith once they left. Yes, I hold the Novus Ordo accountable. Yes, we'll talk about my nuanced approach to liturgy. Basically, as nuanced as, the Pope can do whatever he wants. There's no hardline distinctions, because there is no test. Although a speaker attempts to make a category for an observable fact, although the category lacks clearly defined parameters, that is associated with you'll know it when you see it. Accruable to a 1964 Supreme Court case. You know it when you see it. I know good when I see it. Like Sherlock Holmes says in Hound of the Baskervilles. I know obscenity when I see it. And to me, the Novus Ordo has always felt obscene. And to a lot of you too. What are the people that say the dead opposite? The Novus Ordo is beautiful and the TLM's wrong. Well, they're wrong. But aesthetics is a very imprecise, approximate art. So what you have is all these young people responding to slightly, less young people that started going to the Latin Mass 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. It got really popular. And you'll always hear that little boomer aphorism in the back of your head saying like, all young people rebel. Give them black and white TV, they'll want color. Give them color TV, they'll want black and white, or whatever. Pick your dichotomy. That's dumb. Only dumb young people rebel against good stuff. Smart young people don't. Man, the second I found the Latin Mass, I was like, holy cow, I'm coming back. I was on my way back to the faith. I found it in 2006, a year after I got married. And I was like, whoa, I need to look at this again. And I'd kind of already been looking at it again because of Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle's genius. But that was as a philosopher. Then I found the Latin Mass, and I was like, I need to look at this again. It was a few years reversion journey, and I was back. I never really left, but I just never really believed before then. So if Pope Francis, my whole nuance is if Pope Francis takes away the TLM forever, and I told Tim Flanders this when I debated Traditionis Custodes with him, I'm not going back to being an agnostic atheist. Yeah, it'll just be this tacky mass on Sundays, if that's all that's left. That sucks, but I'm not going back to being an agnostic atheist. So I'm not really worried. But for people who don't know, you don't know what you don't know. You don't have Socratic irony. Until people are like, holy cow, this is real. This is the one true faith. All the myths are true with this one thing, Roman Catholicism. Christianity in the mold of Roman Catholicism. For whatever reason, lex orandi, lex credendi, the way you pray affects the way that you believe. That's because humans are narrative creatures. We respond to narrative. So if you don't know yet, then it's just an atheist factory. Okay, can we play this goofball? I don't know what his name is. I don't want to know. Don't tell me his name in the chat. I don't care. I don't want to know. We don't need more people who are contrarian saying stupid crap online. So can we play this goofball? No one tell me his name. I don't want to know. I'm serious. I don't want to know now.
I'll bring up the mic here. Okay. Let me see if I can get it.
I believe the traditional Latin Mass is the Mass of the ages. Okay, let me get this out of the way really quick. There are many Catholics who actually believe that the Latin Mass goes back to the apostles. It doesn't. The Latin Mass doesn't go back to Peter and Paul. None of the liturgies that we have in the church, East and West, go back to the apostles. Not a single one. The Latin Mass.
First off, people are asking, probably in their heads anyway, did I slow it down to make this guy sound like the voice from the old Twix commercials in the early 90s? No, that is really the way this goof talks. Yeah, I know he can't help it, but when you're saying stuff this stupid, then you deserve to get made fun of for other stuff. So yeah, I don't know what's wrong with him. I don't know what's wrong with the way he thinks, more importantly. Now, I nor anyone that I hang out with and I like claims that the uncut version of the 1962 missal, the TLM, the way that most of us go to it. If I drive to my home parish is in New Orleans. We don't go to the goof parish except begrudgingly, but we don't go there for sacraments. We go there to meet Sunday obligation here in Hattiesburg. None of us expect that the 1962 missal goes in uncut form back to one of the 12 apostles. No, I don't think anyone's ever said that. I'm not a liturgist. Studying liturgical studies is not hard. It's not like studying dogmatic theology or in philosophy, metaphysics, where you need to study it academically or you probably should shut up online, which is a truth. With those couple of things and some more, you need to study it academically or shut up online. Liturgical studies is not hard, but it's not something I've spent a lot of time with. There are guys like Dr. Peter Kwasniewski that he's a trained philosopher and he taught himself it and he knows a fair amount about it. It's not a hard thing. I've heard people try to make it like some tricky science. He just knows more, and he would tell you what I'm telling you. Yeah, the 1962 missal doesn't go all the way back to the apostles in an uncut form. That's not the claim, nor does that need to be the claim for us to make the case that the TLM is the truest and best and highest expression of the Roman rite. That's the claim. It's simple. The true dichotomy is, what do you want for dinner? Steak, fine steak from a steakhouse. What's the best nutrition? Fine steak from a steakhouse or McDonald's? You don't need, well, fine steak doesn't go all the way back to Jesus. Who cares? That's not the claim. Unless you're dealing with retards that think that this like uncut form, that the Mass has to have fallen out of the sky into the blessed hands of St. Peter. That's not the claim. We're not Mormons. We're not Muslims. We don't need things to fall out of the sky in order to be good. We're not Mormons. We're not Muslims. We don't need to be told by supernatural scripture that things are good in order to know that they're good. We have natural reason, which like a lightning rod interacts with the natural intelligible world around, and we have the discerning categories of knowing good from bad. I know fine steak, an expensive steak from a steakhouse, is good nutrition, and I know that McDonald's is garbage without anyone telling me. It's not more complex than that. The part of the fault lies with our side. This organic versus inorganic analogy is not great. It's not great. It's never been great, and I've always criticized it. It sets up strawmans like Goofball McGee over here, or Goofball Martinez, whatever his name is. I don't care. It's not, anything that's man-made traditionally is not considered organic. So when you say the changes to the Mass are organic, no, the changes were sudden and violent in 1969. Don't say inorganic, say they were sudden and violent. And there weren't, and they were cumulatively much, much more than anything that had happened in a millennium and a half. Organic, inorganic is bad, and if you use this distinction that too many trads have used, it's really easy to beat up on. So don't use it. Say it's a matter of good versus bad. Fine steak versus McDonald's. Fine art versus kitsch. Fine art versus camp. High quality versus tacky. And it doesn't have to have been told by some pontiff either. You'll know it when you see it, the obscene. You'll know high quality when you see it. We'll talk about that expression a little bit. Let's get some more from Goofball Martinez here.
I kind of love that nickname. Let's see.
I can't listen to this voice.
Was developed over time. It had serious developments. If you were to go to a liturgy in Latin in the 5th century, it would not look like how it looks like the Missal of 1962. It's really funny. Everyone says the TLM, right? Which is a misnomer, by the way. The TLM is the Mass of the Ages. When they say TLM, they refer to the Missal of 1962. It came out in 1962. And before the Missal of 1962, guess what we had? The Missal of 1955.
Okay,
so
pause?
just 7 years before that, there was a prior Missal, a prior liturgy.
Yeah. Okay. So if you didn't know that there was liturgical change, very, very minor stuff, between 1955 and 1962, one in like 1941, I think. Before that, Pius X did some liturgical changes I don't think he really should have done. We all love Pius X, my onesie included here. He really reformed the breviary. I don't love that either, okay? But those were little tweaks. Those were tweaks. Now, if he says, you know what's funny? I mean, I can't. It's like Rocky Balboa without the heart. If he thinks that because little tweaks that were barely even appreciable between 1955 and 1962 count as violent, sudden reversals, butcherings, as what happened in 1969, then he ain't going to make it. And if anybody out there that's watching this video thinks the distinction between a 1954 Mass and a 1956 Mass and a 1963 Mass are that you'd even notice them, then you're either a liturgist, because it takes that level of subtlety in your mind, that canting a brain, to even note the difference. There's a very, very, very few the changes. And if you think that that's equivalent to the mass, the violent raping of the liturgy that was being released onto Christendom in the 1970s, then you're not going to make it. And saying organic versus inorganic is unhelpful. You're not going to make it, and you don't get it. You don't know a good movie from a bad movie. You should never be asked again a recommendation for a movie. I mean, you'll think, I don't know, what's the worst film we've ever seen? Anything M. Night Shyamalan has done besides Signs.
I was about to say The Village.
The Village. We just had the unpleasure, the misfortune the other night of rewatching that piece of claptrap. And it's one of the worst films I've ever seen. You probably think that's great then. If you think the new mass is beautiful and reverent and makes you want to hit your knees and worship the way the TLM does, irrespective of the fact that the apostles were not saying the TLM in an appreciable form. I don't know who introduced that turd of an argument, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's a good-bad distinction. Okay? Can you repeat after me, parish orphans and retrogrades? It's a good versus bad distinction. Yes, it's storied. There's a lengthy provenance behind the TLM. In a second, he's about to call the TLM a misnomer. He says it's not really Tridentine. Yes, it really is. It really is 80% or better, 85% or better, the liturgy that was reaffirmed at Trent. It is Tridentine. I don't know what this guy's problem is. I don't know if it's young people or just all people. I don't know what's wrong with them such that they just want to say something novel. You know me? I'm pretty much a trad. I'm not a liturgist. I have a relatively simple, straightforward view. I don't do shows on liturgy because it's pretty obvious. The TLM is just superior. The Novus Ordo can and should and will die out sometime. God willing, in my life, in my kids' lives. Because I hate going. I also hate driving, 4-hour round trips, which is why I end up at the Novus Ordo near me sometimes, lots of times. I hate it. All masses will be restored to the TLM at some point. I don't know when it will be. That's all I know. That's my position. I'm not going to do a bunch of liturgical shows. It's not interesting. But I do know that if what you care about is provenance, well, here's what I'll say. There's a fourth, if you go all the way back to the 4th or 5th century, late 4th, early 5th centuries, you're gonna see recognizable portions of the TLM that are basically not recognizable in the Novus Ordo. I mean, maybe so, but they're altered. They're made modern. They're modernized, as they would, insofar as they're recognizable, cognizable at all, appear in the Novus Ordo. A large portion of the 1570 liturgy, 80% or better, makes it right there to 1955 and then 1962. And then you basically have to, it's not a particularly interesting area of study, except liturgy is not that interesting, right? When it's done well and people leave it alone, then it's kind of like no one would want to study liturgy. The only reason it's interesting is because you have these evil modernist innovators who shortly before our lifetimes, or maybe if you're a little older than me, during your lifetime, set everything up to fail liturgically because of lex orandi, lex credendi. So then studying liturgy becomes interesting. Have you ever noticed this? The way an otherwise boring conversation becomes interesting suddenly just because there are evil doers who are sufficiently evil to challenge what's basic, right, and true. I think of that with constitutional jurisprudential debates. Originalists actually have to debate against judicial realists who say text doesn't mean what it says it means. Okay, it's very boring to be a textualist, which is what I was as a constitutional scholar. No, the text means its original public meaning. It doesn't change. It's locked in, whatever meaning was ratified that day that the phrase was ratified and voted on. Doesn't matter if the word changes, who cares? Okay, that's a very boring thing to study. But innovators use the changes of meanings and cultural changes against us, to kill our faith, to kill our lifeblood. That's the same thing with liturgy. It's a very boring thing to study until 1969, 1970. You got all these Mason light guys like Bunini trying to trick us into being atheists by way of liturgy. And then now all of a sudden it's interesting. I would never think about studying it. I'm about to order Kwasniewski's book on it because probably the same reason he got interested. He's a philosopher studying more interesting things. But then all of a sudden liturgy matters. When you get people that are trying to say yes doesn't mean yes, no doesn't mean no. It's about the most boring topic ever. Yes means an affirmative of the truth claim of proposition. No means the negation of it. I don't want to study that. But then you get these relativists that say yes might not mean yes. And you get into debating them. And then as a mechanic, you start using all your tools. Next thing you know, you're ordering books on fundamental, boring stuff that you never thought you would have to argue. Well, we woke up and found ourselves in 2024. Nothing means what it's supposed to mean. So we have to fight for every inch. It's a gridiron battle. Okay, can we go back to this poor soul?
You might want to... Yeah, let's start this here.
It was used, and before that, there was the Missal of 1940. And again, go back to the Council of Trent, and you actually read what the Council of Trent says about the liturgy. It actually doesn't look identical to the Missal of 1962. So no, the Missal of 1962 is not the Mass of the Ages, because when people say Mass of the Ages, they mean that it's actually the Mass that was celebrated by St. Peter and St. Paul. I'm sorry, but it wasn't. You don't know what you're talking about. You have fallen into this radical traditionalist propaganda. It's just not true. It's
thanks to Bug Hall for the reminder. This is something I've heard that, again, not a liturgist, I would have forgotten. You guys know, in a logic debate, a jurisprudence debate, a metaphysics debate, call me, I'm your guy. Liturgy, I'm glad for pointers, and I do remember this. Bug Hall tweeted this to whatever his name is there, that parts of the canon of the Latin Rite liturgy were, as a matter of fact, written by St. Peter. Fact. He learned it from Christ. No part of the vulgar, I'm not trying to get into hurling mud, but no part of the Novus Ordo Missae were written by an apostle. And no part has come down. Bug Hall uses the O word. I hate it, and I can show people why they shouldn't use it. And no part has come down through the ages. He said, just stop. Thank you, Bug. Thank you. That's why it's called Mass of the Ages, by the way. Now, I don't think it's a sine qua non that it has to have come from St. Peter, but I've heard this time and time again. It did. Parts of it did. And they got rid of the parts that came from St. Peter. But now, I would argue, Bug and other fellow trads, it's still the Mass of the Ages, even if it was birthed in the 4th century. And we need to start arguing like it is, because so Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, sorry, I'm citing all these Supreme Court justices today, ones that I don't like. I'm going to be citing another one I don't like today as a sort of historian of the Supreme Court. He says that nature, he's a nominalist. He said nature loathes distinctions of kind, all things that these religious people consider distinctions of kind are really just more crystallized distinctions of degree. That's what Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a certified genius, but he was a bad guy. That's what he said. That's what he said, that there aren't any real distinctions of kind. And I would say that we trads are borrowing against this kind of nominalist impulse, this nominalist intuition. If we speak of the Mass of the Ages needing to come directly from Peter through Christ, I'm not saying that Bug's wrong. I don't think he is. I think he's right. But to call it the Mass of the Ages, it's fine to say, look, there's a distinction of kind between proper liturgy, well-ordered liturgy, and bad liturgy, even if the distinction doesn't have its roots in much chronology or in chronology that goes all the way, that tunnels all the way back. We can still say definitively, confidently, good liturgy, this is Aristotle's function argument, is liturgy that fulfills its telos through its ergon. This means that it can be the Mass of the Ages if it fulfills the telos, the goal of a liturgy, which is union with God that is clearly transmitted, that brings most souls into union with God. Some number, only God knows what the number is. What percentage of the people have to be brought into a kind of immediate mystical union with God at lower levels in order for us to call it a proper liturgy? Well, I don't know, but it's there with the TLM. And if you don't see that it's there with the TLM, or you don't detect it in the ether when you go into a Tridentine Latin Mass, then you're not going to make it. There's a reason that all these people on the internet, like probably this guy, if I poked around his material, I'm not going to poke around his online content, not interested. It's just a big gag. I won't say grift, it's a gag to get you to look. They say, oh, I do like going. I haven't heard anyone say I don't like going to the TLM. Never heard it, aside from really, really lefty modernist, Protestants. But most Protestants I've even brought are like, wow. Catholics that have never been are like, wow. The only way you cover the explanatory gap for that high degree of ubiquity, that high degree of consensus, is, okay, this is a substance whose telos is being adequated. Aristotle's function argument. This is a thing that's doing its job. The TLM. That's why we all feel it. Can we prove it? No. Aristotle says you're a fool if you think that ethics isn't a real science just because its demonstrations feel more approximate than the demonstrations of the geometer. They're both sciences. Geometry has very, very low margins of error, highest demonstrability, but there are other sciences that are objective, just with slightly larger margins of error, like ethics, still an objective science, just with higher margins of error, or like liturgical studies. And it's an intellectual turd. I don't have to look into it much. The Novus Ordo fails to adequate its telos, and the reason why I know, is because of an indisputable phenomenological fact, a brute fact of phenomenology, in fact. Me and all my friends goofed around during it. And all the same friends that goofed around during it that I've taken back to Mass since we've been adults are like, holy cow, man. That is something. That's not nothing. As my friend Joe would say, that ain't nothing. It's something, and it's what Aristotle would account for as part of the disparity between a more precise science and a less precise science. This is a little less precise, but it's still objective. It's still objective. You're a fool if you say that's not an objective kind of fact. Okay, can we go back to this guy? It's a good-bad distinction. It doesn't, in order to be the Mass of the Roman Rite, the Mass of the Ages, it doesn't have to go all the way back to St. Peter, though there are elements of it that do. And you can't say that about the Novus Ordo.
Reverence, solemnity, and sacredness are rich and beautiful. Oh, he says, so yes, we don't accept the Vatican II Council because of its ambiguity and rewriting of the core beliefs and teaching of the Catholic faith. Name one Catholic teaching that was rewritten at Vatican II. You can't name one because, again, every single teaching is found before Vatican II. So this person that's leaving this comment right here, you're not Catholic. I'm sorry, but you're just not. You are not Catholic because you reject Vatican II. And again, the Catholic Church teaches that. The Catholic Church before Vatican II teaches that you can't reject ecumenical councils. If you do, you're skip.
All right, so Mexican Rocky Balboa is done talking here. And yeah, we'll cut him off. And this is true. And I tweeted out, this is the one thing he said that's true. There are no theological errors in the documents of Vatican II, at least the three types of ecumenical council documents: declarations, decrees, and constitutions. And the big four, the four constitutions, no errors. There is what I call codified heteropraxy in several of the documents. We have a change in equipoise, a drastic, ostensibly non-allowable change in equipoise immediately before and immediately after the council. Things on the teaching on other religions. This is a big one, particularly Judaism, but also Islam, Buddhism. We get a radical countenancing of how other religions are spoken of that I think pretty reliably lead to the Abu Dhabi statement, where Francis is saying actual error. And so is it kind of, Nietzsche said, or through Zarathustra, he's the bridge between man and overman. Some of the documents on religious freedom and other world religions are the bridge between the Catholic teaching on other religions. The bridge is not itself a breach. I agree with Rocky here, but they lead to actual error that hasn't really been codified magisterially by Francis, thank goodness, in things like the Abu Dhabi statement. Oh, okay, so is everyone, how about one of the followers of Mexican Rocky ask him, okay, but this is an error, right? The Abu Dhabi statement that God wills, presumably with his wise will, the diversity of religions. That's an error, yes? So I will defend Nostra Aetate, even though it's close. It's as close as you can get to an error without being an error. Dignitatis Humanae. Thomas Pink gives a very good account. There's not an error there, but it's close at times. Particularly these two documents are very, 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 very close. And they lead, which is all, I believe, the bad guys at Vatican II were trying to do. They lead to the Abu Dhabi statement by Francis in whatever that was, 2016. God wills the diversity of religion, meaning in God's wise will. He hopes people will have idols. Bishop Schneider prompted Francis to back it off a little bit, but Francis has repeated the error since then. Schneider was like, yo, you mean that God allows error, he allows sin, and he allows it through something called his permissive will, his negative will. Is that what you mean? And Francis said, maybe. Kind of. So we all said, okay, fine. I don't want another fight. We have enough fights with Francis. But then after that, he's re-upped the heretical sounding statement that God wills the diversity of religions. That's an error. And my poor misled friend with a very deep voice here, my poor baritone friend, if Vatican II, if not Lumen Gentium, if Dignitati, I'm losing it all here. If Nostra Aetate had said anything closer to what Francis said in the Abu Dhabi statement that God wills the diversity of religion, I'd be on the other side on this one too. I'd be like, no, that's an error. What Francis said is a theological error. God cannot will the diversity of religions. This is just error, hard error, full stop, absolutely heterodox. Number, whatever it is, number 17 in his pontificate. I don't know what it is. I'm not actually counting. I've done lists. That's an error. And I did a show last week on how, you're not going to back me down. That's just a fact. God, we do not have a voluntarist God. Our God affirms the principle of non-contradiction. God does not will the diversity of religion. He wills the unicity of religion. He wants all men to go to heaven. You can't go to heaven unless you're Catholic. So you're in the hot seat now, guy. If you're saying Vatican II doesn't say the Abu Dhabi statement, I say, yeah, that's true. It tiptoes up to it. It leads the bad guys into being able to say it a couple decades later, 3, 4, 5 decades later, which is what it did. True. So you're right. But now I want to hear you say, what do you say about the Abu Dhabi statement? That's an error. And if it had been in Vatican II, if it had been any of those, Dignitatis Humanae. Why am I saying the names wrong? I studied this. I was starting to write a book on it. These are just basic. If it said any of that, then we wouldn't be agreeing. Okay, but so put that to the side. Vatican II documents don't contain hard errors. They contain what we were calling, as we're putting this book together, codified heteropraxy. Leading people just a soft pass, just a nice pass to a bunny, to a layup. Except it's not a layup, it's error that'll get you, make you a heretic. The way has happened in the church now. If you take Francis at his word, you're believing heresy. God does not will the diversity of religions. Okay, so that's the one thing he said that's technically correct, though I suspect he'd have the wrong view on it if we got into it. Back to liturgy. Sacrosanctum Concilium. That's the first of the 4 constitutions that came out. It was released like less than a year after the council started out. Maybe it was like 13 months. It was either 13 months or 11 months after the council started. They wanted to release this thing right away so they could get to work on the concilium, drafting up the monstrosity, the Frankenstein monstrosity. Pope Benedict himself called it a banal accretion of other liturgical properties, a banal accretion of basically what is it, like the Presbyterian service is basically what this is. Bring in the Cranmer tables, the Protestant tables, destroy all our altars, destroy them, wrecking ball, destroy them, pull out all the altars, put in ugly tables, get rid of cruciform churches if they were built in the 70s or early 80s, make them built in the round, make us look at the other ugly parishioners. We want to look at God. Turn the priest around, have them hold hands, put the goofy handshaking shit in there. Get it out, man. Okay, so here's my question. I've never had this answered. And when I was still talking to Lofton, he couldn't answer it. I've asked my friend Chris Plants. He couldn't answer it. It's called the binder drop test. Binder drop theory. If this wasn't a fait accompli, the Novus Ordo Missae, as conceived by Sacrosanctum Concilium and perfected 5.5 years later by maybe a Mason Bunini, Monsignor Bunini, who was essentially censured 3 years after he released the Mass, into this missal of Paul VI. If this wasn't a fait accompli, a plan brought to fruition according to an agenda that was eventually a fait accompli, then how in the sweet fanciful Moses do you account for the fact that when I go on vacation or I go on speaking tours and I head out on the road with my family in our RV across this once great fallen polity with cracks in the walls everywhere, that I see the same banal accretion, to use Benedict XVI's term, the same ugly monstrosity with all of the unplanned, extemporaneous elements and features everywhere. How do you explain that? In other words, the binder drop theory is if a substitute teachers in grade school and middle school always get harassed by their students because they don't know what's going on. If they teach and at a minute before the release bell at 3 p.m. at 2:59 on the nose, every student drops his binder like this. Well, you probably couldn't hear that. Trapper keepers are much louder. Yeah, there. If they all do it at 2:59, we used to think that was gangbuster. We think that shit was cool in 5th grade. We really liked it. If we'd have a substitute teacher, 2:59, everyone would drop their binder on the floor. And they can't really get that mad because Yes, it's obvious you planned it, but it's not really an offense. It's not offensive. It's abnormal. But it would be like a substitute teacher literally going back to the teacher's lounge and being like, the greatest coincidence happened ever today. Everyone happened to drop their binders all at the same time, and it was all as the second hand crossed 259. All the other teachers would look at that substitute and be like, we get why you're just a substitute, dude. You're probably not smart enough to be a substitute teacher. Well, this is what I say to folks when I ask them, are you dumb like this substitute teacher? How did we get all the same accretions, particularly the ones that aren't even in the missal of Paul VI, Bonini's missal? How do we get them all the exact same without them being codified? Why do they do the exact same shit at all the Novus Ordos? And it's all objectionable stuff too. It's not even like, well, they added the 3 Hail Marys and the St. Michael prayer. Maybe this is what the trads mean when they say organic versus inorganic. I think they just mean organic. People did it extemporaneously and it was good, not cringe. Just say good, okay? Because it's not really organic if a human being is like, let's do 3 Hail Marys and a St. Michael at the end. Well, that's cool. That's based. I love it. I love doing that. Some Novus Ordos, if it's a good priest, we'll do that. But it's always at the TLM they'll do that. I hardly ever do that at a Novus Ordo, right? So how is it that all this same bad stuff that happens at the clown masses minor, petite clown masses, you don't actually have the clowns, but you just have the hand holding and the clapping during church, after the homily. Oh, and pieces of scripture, this sticks in my crop, pieces of scripture in the USCCB distributed missal, censured, blocked out, saying, don't read this. Don't read these holy words from Holy Writ. Don't read Ephesians 5, verses 20, 22 and 23, where it says women need to obey their husband. Don't do that. That's your first big clue. None of this stuff happens at the TLM. So if you're stupid or you're not good at aesthetics or you're one of these goofs that ain't going to make it, and you're like, well, I think the Novus Ordo is beautiful. Well, then you're just not smart. It's that simple. Prove it. Well, yeah, you're asking me to prove that not murdering someone is better than murdering them. There are natural law appeals, but it's stupid and it's a waste of everyone's time. Everyone gets it. So people know I can go deep. I showed you guys the Scholar's Mate, right? 4-move checkmate on Protestants on the rule of faith, on sola scriptura. That's technical. That's involving logical axioms and stuff. You see me debate, but you need to learn to know when to hold frame. And the frame to hold is here. This is a stupid waste, man. This is a turd. If you don't get the Tridentine Latin Mass, which is from Trent, by the way, he snuck in somewhere. I might not have heard it when I played it this time. Oh, it's a misnomer. It's a misnomer. It's not a misnomer. 1570 was the single most definitive moment in the TLM, but it goes back over 1,000 years before that. 70-30, 80-20. We'll take that. And guess what? Here's the truth. I'm not just a fusty trad that wants to argue about liturgy. I don't really want to talk about liturgy. I just want to go to a good liturgy. I'm not really interested in it aside from that. I'll take 70-30. I'll take 80-20. If the changes they made, I don't say organic or inorganic, if the changes they made in 69 and 70 were take out 20% of the stuff, then I'd be cool with it. I'd be like, well, I don't really love the messing around, but I also don't love the, liturgical changes that Pius X did, gutting the breviary at the start of the century. I don't love that either, but no one's going to have a revolution about it. He was a good pope. He helped our faith in other ways. Excellence does not require perfection. Henry James. Pius X is a darn tootin' good pope. Okay, he shouldn't have messed with the breviary. Pius XI and 12 both kind of paved the way for liturgical changes. Shouldn't have done it. 11 was cool. 12 was decent. No one's gonna hold these guys accountable for one little error. Okay, so if at Vatican II they wanted to do whatever to the liturgy and they did it with a good will, they would have done 70-30. That still would have been pretty violent changes, but we would have been like, well, it's mostly the same mass. Pope Francis is the one that calls Novus Ordo versus TLM by ritualism. It's not. It's the same rite. It's one rite. It's two forms of one rite. But Francis is the one admitting this thing looks like two forms. Why? Why? Because you can't see it when you know it. So this expression, I'll know it when I see it, is about obscenity. And it comes from a 1964 Supreme Court case. And if you guys don't know, Supreme Court justices, whether they're liberal or conservative justices, are excellent. The best in the land at enunciating and articulating distinctions. That's really what lawyers are good at. And good lawyers are amazing at it. And the best lawyers, the ones, the black robes sitting on the bench, you got to be able to count to 5 to convince 9. These are the best in the land, the best ever at distinctions. They're not great philosophers, but aside from that, the distinctions are impressive. So when they say, well, you'll know it when you see it, I don't know how else to describe the categories of obscenity versus art. That was the case at issue in this 1964 SCOTUS case called Jacobellis v. Ohio, very famous case. Justice Potter Stewart describes this, I'll know it when I see it, as the threshold for obscenity. Yeah, because some art is, and I mean, I'm not really into art that's pushing the limits on this anyway, but they're dealing in 1964 with this crappy modern art that they didn't want to proscribe or illegalize, you see. So they had to leave the borderline between crappy avant-garde modern art and obscenity sort of distinct. But Justice Stewart says, no, I'll know it when I see it, and so will you. Another great distinction by Oliver Wendell Holmes, who I keep citing today, even though I don't like him, 30 years earlier, is he says, even a dog knows the difference between being kicked and tripped over. I'm telling you, he was like a IQ 170. Oliver Wendell Holmes is way up there. So he was not talking about obscenity, but something, a close concept. Even a dog knows the difference between being kicked and tripped over. I'll know it when I see it. Wikipedia says, by this, a speaker always attempts to categorize an observable fact, although the category lacks clearly defined parameters. Doesn't mean the category doesn't exist. It means it's ineffable. A similar phrase, Wikipedia says, appears in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Hound of the Baskervilles, in which Sherlock comments on the quality of a portrait by stating, I know what is good when I see it. And guess what? This is a presupposition by Thomas Aquinas when he articulates the first principle of practical reason. You know what that is? Do the good, avoid the bad. If you have a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old at home, you know, they'll keep saying, well, what? How? Well, how do I know? Why? What do I do to figure it out? You'll know. At a certain point, you hit the basement of the house, and you're like, we can't go any lower. We're going to hit soil. You'll know it when you see it. You'll know it when you see it. I know good when I see it. Human beings have it written on the heart. Basic good-bad distinctions, particularly ones that are relevant for our salvation. We have them written on our heart. That's called man's natural reason. It's our specific difference. It sets us apart from the animals. Nature is intelligible. We can learn from and about it because it corresponds with our natural reason. Our intellectus adequates logos, adequates ratios, the natures of things. They communicate with our brain. They don't do that with your dog's brain or with the chimpanzee's brain. They don't do that. It's really our mind. We won't do philosophy of mind today. Just know that there's basic distinctions that enable us to say, even though I can't articulate it, I know good when I see it, I know obscenity when I see it. This is what you need instead of going through organic versus inorganic, which is weak. I can point out all the technical flaws. It's a bad distinction, and they'll poke holes in it. The better, more frame-setting position to stake out for trads versus goofballs like this that won't get them on their high horse is, dude, if you don't know it when you see it, there's nothing I can do for you, and you ain't going to make it. You seem like you might, if you think the Novus Ordo is anywhere near what the TLM is, the main rite in the Roman Catholic Church, the Latin rite, Roman rite. If you think the Novus Ordo is beautiful, then you probably are the kind of guy that you might forget to put on pants every third day. You might forget to wash with soap in the shower. You might get out of the shower soaking wet and you might just try to put all your clothes on before you use a towel. You're a retard. It's that simple. That's called setting frame, right? You might be the kind of moron that thinks McDonald's is a fancy meal or a meal appropriate to take a date to. Or if you want to impress someone, you're like, I want to take you to this really great little restaurant we have in town. It's a hole in the wall corner. It's a really charming little place. It's called, it's Irish food, I think. It's called McDonald's. You're a moron if you don't know the difference. They did this to us for a reason. It's binder drop theory. The reason that all the Novus Ordos, 90% are better. And I don't play the exception games. Anyway, I have a great Novus Ordo. Yeah, that's fine. I've been to like one in my whole life. The reason like 90% are better, probably 95% are better, of the Novus Ordos have all the same campy crap that didn't even make it into the missal is because there's an understanding, a memo that went out sort of off the record, no paper trail. Do this all the time. This will complete the deal. This will kill whatever spirit of faith is left in your congregation. And it's not much. It's not much. And I see the difference between me and most trads is I live in a place without a TLM within an hour. And so I'm at Novus Ordo a lot of times. The people there, by and large, don't get it. Now, I've defended them. They can still get to heaven that way. You get to heaven by eliminating habitual mortal sin. Doesn't mean they get it liturgically because they've never been exposed to it. They are living Novus Ordo attendees. Some of them are good people with some tacky ass crap. And they just don't know. They think we're aesthetically, the aesthetic part of their heart is like a canker. It's blackened over and hardened, like a plaque in the veins, like a Protestant's is. They just have no appreciation. I'm going to play Dies Irae on the way out. They have no appreciation for this is what it is to be Catholic. This is what it means to be Catholic. And I know a lot of the people, let me close by saying this. A lot of the people that go to the Latin Mass don't understand what it is to be in the world but not of the world. Or, manly. They think manly means you have a beard and you wear a bad-fitting suit rather than... So they have bad categories for manliness at the TLM. I'm happy to say that. Okay? You got a lot of people that get it aesthetically. Latin Mass is beautiful. It's superior. It's really our only true Mass. Just like the Novus Ordo people don't get they don't have those aesthetic categories. If you show it to them, they're like, whoa, what faith is this? Is that what Mormons go to or something, dude? Well, we have our own problems, we trads. One, not convincing many people. No one was convincing me of this stuff in the 90s, so thanks a lot, teachers. You all failed me. Should have shown me the Latin Mass a lot earlier. It would have changed some things for me. So there have not been these winsome defenders of the Latin Mass the way I'm always hearing trads say there are. It should be much more mainstream. And the reason it's not more mainstream is because they make weak arguments. I think because part of them, it's like a blocked wish, want to keep it for themselves. Instead of like, no. This needs to be for everyone. So I'm kind of on the fringes of trads, and I'm saying the most ambitious thing. The Novus Ordo needs to die out. Now, that doesn't mean we can just pretend it doesn't exist. The reason that it's been so badly argued for is because it hasn't been lived in a winsome way. We got a feminism problem in the Latin Mass as well. Me and Steph have seen that really up close and personal. It's really ugly. It's one thing when you go to a Novus Ordo Mass and you got a bunch of goofball normies, you know, that are just pretty much like a congregation of white people anywhere in the suburbs nowadays. They just look like white people in the suburbs, you know, with some Mexicans and some Filipinos and some Asians mixed in. You're like, okay, this is just a grouping of white people. Maybe I'm at the Trader Joe's or something. That's what you feel like when you go to a Novus Ordo. Except there's you know, at least there's something well, there's Eucharist, but Trader Joe's, generally speaking, setting aside the Eucharist, which is still the one true Eucharist, it's got higher quality stuff. But aside from that, you look around and you're like, okay, this is just kind of the bougie, dead-eyed suburbanites I'd see at a Trader Joe's. They don't want to shop at Walmart. They don't really get it. They're normies. You talk to them, they're pretty much, Aristotle says, right? They live lives fit for cattle. That's almost what you get when you go to a Novus Ordo. They don't know. They're just kind of going, Super Bowl, blah, blah, blah. I love sports, but they're not the best and the highest. Sports are the best these people live for. They're in the world and they are of the world. Then you go to a Latin Mass, you're like, whoa, this is amazing. Now I get, this is like 90% of the picture, because again, we're narrative creatures because of the Logos. Jesus is Logos. He's the Word God-man. Word God-man means that we relate to stuff through a narrative. You go to one TLM and you're like, holy cow, I get it. This is what it is to be Catholic 90% or better, even if I haven't studied anything. Even if most people haven't studied Aquinas aside from just kind of corny tourist Aquinas reading. You're never going to know the metaphysics. You're never going to read the Dante et Essentia. You're never going to read the real stuff. You don't need to. You have the Latin Mass. It's really Catholic. That's not an exaggeration. That's not a mischaracterization. You get it. 90%. That's why there's a liturgy like the TLM, because the 90% of any crowd is not going to do stuff the right way. The 90% are the apollistic sort of cattle people. Every crowd has it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way God created humanity. 10% or fewer will tend to doing stuff the right way, looking into the details, taking a peek into the crevices, correcting the errors, pulling the wheat from the chaff for the rest of them. That's why liturgy matters, because you get it if you go to a good liturgy, even if you're just a simple guy. But in the Latin Mass, we have problems too. And that's why it hasn't been argued for and preponderated much until there's this phenomenon. It was happening on Taylor Marshall's channel in 2018. It was like anything providential, a stroke of good luck. It was right after the McCarrick thing. There's a natter point in Francis's pontificate before he got a tailwind again. The McCarrick thing, Francis was super guilty, just lying out his face for McCarrick. Me and Taylor Marshall did some St. Gallen Mafia shows, and then some Fatima shows, and then some Go to the TLM shows, and people were like, oh my gosh. There was a kind of Catholic American awakening. And now here we are 6 years later, and there's pushback. And the pushback works, and I don't know if it involves shills gotten paid for by the Vatican, or probably not. These are people that might not even know. They're just being pushed in a direction. It doesn't take much explicit shilling. And now they're just being contrarian and saying stupid things. And, the trads have never been good at selling this. The trads have never made manliness look good. The Novus Ordos have never made being a normie look good. Heaven be with us. But when you know it, you see it. When you hear it, you'll know. Deus Volt, people, I'll leave you with Dies Irae. It's the best. God bless you, Deus Volt.
host of